Good afternoon. Okay, got it. Okay. Good afternoon, friends and newcomers to the South Orange Library Summer Lecture Series, Special Conversations with Special People. I'm Phyllis Kalb, and I'm so happy today to have a wonderful and very special guest speaker, Father Lawrence Frizzell, who indeed is very special to many people, especially me. Father Frizzell is the director-founder of the Jewish Christian Studies graduate program at Seton Hall University. This unique curriculum was the first of its kind in the world and continues to serve as a model for educating in ways to increase mutual understanding and harmony. And Father Frizzell first spoke for our library group on November 19, 1992 on the topic, The Spirit of Thanksgiving. Now the Spirit of Thanksgiving, and I'll read you all the rest that he did, but I just have to say, I have to tell you that in a few weeks, I will be retiring, but the library, it's wonderful, and they will have other people running these programs. And so I just want you to know that every Friday, we have a whole list in September. I'll be leaving the end of September, so the 4 Fridays in September, I'm having Roger Foster, professor of philosophy at City University of New York, and he'll be speaking, and Myla Jacey, New Jersey Assemblywoman, topic, and her thing is going to be all things New Jersey legislature. And then I'll have professor of Seton Hall University, Dr. Joseph E. Nair, and he's going to be speaking about leading a higher education during a pandemic. And then at the end of the month, my granddaughter goes to University of Vermont, a bioengineering student, and she has a professor who lives in Vermont and who will be speaking, Dr. Amber Duran, and she's professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Vermont, and she's going to be speaking about a woman in STEM. And for those who don't know, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it's the new wave. It's the new thing that all students are trying to achieve. And so I hope that you'll all join us and continue joining us, because I'm going to hand over the torch. I don't know to who yet, but everyone in the library is so talented and kind and loving. I love them. For 35 and a half years, I've worked with them, and they're my second family. But in any case, let's get back to Father Frizzell, who, after he spoke on the Spirit of Thanksgiving, he spoke in 1997 on the First Crusade, 2006 Passover and Holy Week Easter, 2014, 2 faith experiences of Thanksgiving. 2018, he spoke on the Book of Esther, Queen Esther and the Feast of Purim. After that, following year, Passover and Easter, an artistic expression, and he brought slides. It was wonderful. And then this is something completely different. November 21st, 2020, he spoke on Robert Service, Poems from the Klondike Gold Rush Days, which was so fascinating and so completely different from your spiritual talks. And I loved it. And then 2020, you spoke on interfaith dialogue and collaboration, which you're so good at, collaborating and dialogue, and how important it is. And today's topic, this is when I called you up and I said, you can speak about anything you'd like. And when you said, I'd like to speak on the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, in Jewish and Christian traditions. And it's the first Psalm I ever memorized when I was a child. I loved it. And it's so meaningful and spiritual and for all people. So I'm so excited that you're here. And it means so much to me that you're going to speak about this. Everyone, we're so blessed to have you. I feel so blessed to know you and have you as a friend throughout all these years. So it is with great pleasure I introduce our very special guest, and someone I truly am grateful for all the inspiration, education, and kindness that he has shown me. Father Lawrence Frizzell.
Well, thank you very much, Phyllis. And we wish you a change of pace, as it were, in terms of thinking of retirement, but I hope it'll be a very active and challenging and interesting ways, not challenging in terms of COVID and other problems, but in terms of all of the opportunities that will come for you and your family. And so we've enjoyed having you as our leader in these years of activities in the library. And we certainly will keep remembering all the good things we've shared.
Thank you.
I have, in focusing on a short and familiar psalm to many of us, Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd," I want to have a presentation that would be giving us the background and then the Jewish experience coming out of the biblical heritage. And then I'll take questions or points of observation. We'll have a little break for conversation and any questions you may have. And then I will go to the Christian appreciation of Psalm 23. So first, it's the psalm that with which we're very familiar, and we see God as the shepherd. So that image of a pastor, and the Latin word for shepherd is pastor. The Lord himself is guiding each person and each community in the ways of growth into fullness of life. But let's first, before we go to the text, recall a few points about the life of a shepherd, and especially in very ancient times. And of course, you recall that this psalm is attributed to King David. And in the second book of Samuel, he draws attention to his childhood, where he exercised this role of a shepherd and defended his flock, even from a bear and a lion. Of course, he learned how to use the slingshot very effectively in that youthful care of his father's flock. Now, when we look at the role of the shepherd then, the challenge is the shepherd is the guide, and therefore he walks ahead of the flock as he searches for pasture. The shepherd is guiding so that the path is smooth, choosing the ways in which people can reach a good pasture without too many treacherous roads or difficult terrain. Then he tries to protect his flock from any enemies. Now, in ancient times, of course, as well as in modern times, the enemies might include poisonous weeds, might include snakes and scorpions, other creatures of the earth. And then, of course, there could be human enemies for which he has to defend his flock. And so that theme, of course, will come to in a little while. But let's think of the way that the shepherd provides a rhythm for the flock, guiding them in the morning into a place of green pasture he hopes to find that will be abundant enough for the flock that he has. Then he wants to find a place of quiet for the hot noontime. So there will be what they call still water or restful waters where the sheep can have refreshment and then a time of rest during the heat of the day. The shepherd then is going to guide them home in the evening. And of course, he'll take care that all of the sheep are still with him. if any has strayed, then he has to go out searching for it. And so the shepherd is a healer of any of the sheep that might be injured or be sick. He tries to rescue from danger any of the flock that might have become object of interest to a wolf, for example. And then the shepherd is going to try to provide for the community of his flock so that everyone is taken care of. Now let's think to compare this with the mystery of God's presence in human life. That's where we find that God is, first of all, the guide who is offering the smooth path. We hope that the path that we choose will be following the divine will so that our progress is going to be ordered in the way that will bring abundant benefits, not only for the individual, but for the larger community at which each individual is a member and has a responsibility. So the idea of God as a host comes in the second part of the song. And so I will now go to the text, and you're all familiar possibly with the King James Version, and so we could use that text, and I have other translations at hand, of course, for us. But the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, there's another translation that says, I think is better, I shall not lack anything, because the human wants can sometimes be disordered. And so to be satisfied with what we have and realize that we don't lack anything, maybe the insight that English translation, I shall not want, is drawing our attention to. The Lord makes me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters. So these are fresh waters, of course, pools rather than a swiftly running stream, so that the sheep can pasture and then have the benefit of the drink that will give them, let's say, the other half of the meal we have to eat and drink. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. So God is the one who is guiding, and the right order that is in the very mystery of God is being shared with God's creatures. When we realize that life is a journey, there's a path that we are to follow. We're to make choices that are, we hope, responding to the best for us and what God's will is for us. There are times of danger. So, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The staff is to guide the sheep and sometimes to bring a sheep into line. The rod would be to protect from an attack, either a human enemy or a wolf or other beast. And so the protective presence of God is assured. This verse 5 draws attention to God as the host. And so we've moved from the idea of a sheep in a pasture to something in the human order, we might say. You prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. So here we'd often think of a table and chairs. Our image, however, would not be likely that of a shepherd in his tent. And so the image of a table would be a rug that's put on the floor, the dirt floor of the temporary dwelling as a person moves from place to place in a tent. And of course, before the rug is laid down as the table, the person has to look to make sure there are no scorpions, other little beasties that could make an unsettling presence. And so the idea of preparing the table then is not only presenting food items, but also before the table is laid on the ground, the rug is in place for people to sit down around. The person would want to make sure that there are no poisonous insects or anything like that that could cause great disturbance. The abundance of food and drink, of course, is implied, along with the idea of a guest being anointed. That would be showing the favor that the host wishes to bestow upon a particular guest, but maybe upon all the guests. And the final verse, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This, the English translation, takes a phrase for the length of days. And that phrase then is sometimes rendered in terms of the mystery of eternity. And the text has alluded to the temple and to the presence of God's goodness and mercy, God's hesed, God's loving kindness, and that shows itself in forgiveness and mercy for those who have strayed. And then the hope is that people will dwell in the house of the Lord. So this refers first to the temple built by King Solomon in Jerusalem, and then, of course, to a second temple after the Babylonian exile. And so the community is the recipient of God's goodness and mercy in the covenant. In the covenant of Abraham and the covenant of Mount Sinai, the biblical heritage then is put within that context of a unique bond with God. So God comes with the offer of all of the gifts and blessings that a community and each of its members would need. So here we have the psalm in a context of the ancient world, and then we can move to any period in history, realizing that our human condition is very similar no matter when we're living and what part of the world we're in. There will be many unique dimensions to each person's life, but there is that sense of continuity, that sense of movement into the plan whereby we all must see ourselves as on a pilgrimage, not only as a journey of aging as a journey, that's sometimes the topic of title of certain books, but the journey made in common with many other people is one with a sacred goal, and that's what we call a pilgrimage. And so the way in which the biblical heritage draws us to look in faith and in hope for all of the things that really truly matter in our life. And therefore we're asking that God be the guide, God be the one who is as protector, as the role of a shepherd. So I'm going to stop here now and see if there are any reflections and any points that you would like to make.
Out of all the Psalms, why do you think this one stood out the most?
Well, I should have mentioned the 150 Psalms cover every aspect of human life, the individual and the community. And so, so the variety, of course, prayers, which some of them began as individual prayers, we think. Others, of course, were composed as hymns and acts of praise to God in the community, especially in the temple, but in many other settings as well. So, so this psalm is unique in a sense, in terms of the way in which the imagery is focusing on God's care, without any mention of how the sheep are sometimes not doing the right thing. Now, people who have lived on a farm know that the sheep is not the smartest animal in the barnyard. And so there could be a sense of criticism that people are not following the rules, they're not following God's will. There are other Psalms in which people examine their conscience, like Psalm 51, where David is lamenting his sins. And so, so this Psalm focuses on the inner relationship between God and his people, on the individual sense of union with God, but always, of course, within the sense of a flock, within the context of a community. So some of the other Psalms will look at the tragedies of life. This Psalm recognizes that there are dangers, there are situations in which a person could be definitely at a grave disadvantage, could be suffering, but the protective hand of God is seen to be the center of focus, and that God's protective presence and God's invitation to a banquet, to the shared meal that will be a symbol of the experience of communion with the living God.
Thank you.
Is there any other point that you'd like to reflect on? So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 34 in terms of the way in which this image of a shepherd is developed. And so Ezekiel, as a young man, was taken into exile in the year 597. He was there 10 years before the destruction of Jerusalem. And in 593, he was called to not only to continue being a priest, which he was from birth, but to be a teacher, a prophet. And in his message, he is sometimes criticizing the community as a rebellious community. And in Ezekiel chapter 34, he draws attention to the inadequate leader, the way in which either the priests as leaders and would be present in the exile situation, and apparently they haven't been doing their job. Just as the time before the exile, both the king and the priests, the two dynasties that were to guide Israel, these community leaders had failed dismally, and the way in which the prophets interpreted the exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, the loss of the temple, and the way in which the people were suffering, that was seen to be the result of the failure on the part of the leaders. So here in Ezekiel chapter 34, we have God criticizing the shepherds. Shepherds of Israel, you have been tending not the flock, but just looking after your own advantage. And so he gives a number of examples of how the self-centeredness of leaders has led to the failure of their duties. And so this text is pertinent, certainly for any religious or political leader, no matter what age we live in, that self-service, taking advantage of one's privileges and so on, all of that would be at the detriment to the true role of the community's leaders, whether they're spiritual, religious leaders or social, political leaders. So I would draw attention to the way in which God's criticism comes in verse 8 to the point that my flock, God says, has been prey for the wild beasts, for want of anyone to tend them, since my shepherds have not taken thought of my flock. And so the next part of the text, after this harsh criticism of failures of the leaders, is that God himself is going to intervene. And this is during the time of exile, of course. So there is a sense of hope for the future. I am going to take thought for my flock and seek them out as a shepherd seeks out his flock when some animals in his flock have been separated. So I will seek out my flock as they were scattered on the day of cloud and gloom. I will take them out from all the peoples and gather them into their own lands, and I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel by the water courses and all the center settled portions of the land. Now, God himself then is exercising this role of protective shepherd. Then he goes on in verse 23, and I will appoint a single shepherd over them. So the people of Israel have been divided. The 12 tribes had been dispersed, and now the idea of a unification of the 12 tribes around King David. That is the successor to the king who ruled for 40 years over the people of Israel. He shall tend them. He shall be a shepherd for them. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David shall be the ruler among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. So in the prophet Ezekiel and in other texts, let's say Jeremiah 23, for example, we have the role of shepherd being given to the teacher, and the teacher is telling people that in the future there will be an adequate leadership, that the instruments of God who will be raised into the role of priest and king, and the community will be restored to its own land. So if I stop here, is there any reflection, any thought that you would have?
Oh.
So now, having placed the psalm within the context of the way in which a leader should guide the community of faith, we find that the Christian scriptures build upon this imagery, especially from Ezekiel chapter 34, and the way in which the Christian community is developing its insights would be the next point that I would come to in our discussion. But before that, is there any other point that you'd like to mention? So in the time before the New Testament, there was a competition, we might say, for understanding the role of the leader and who that leader should be. And so, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we call the documents that were found in 1947 and the following years in the area of in the mountains just behind Jericho, near the Dead Sea, there was a community that had separated itself from the rest of the Jewish people. They were unhappy with the way in which the Hasmonean family had come to take the high priesthood. They were of priestly heritage, descendants of Aaron, but this particular group that we call the Dead Sea Scroll people had thought that it was not the line of descendants of Aaron that should reach the high priesthood. But when the Hasmonean family led the revolt against the Greeks from 167 to 164 BC, there was a persecution of the people in the land of Judea, and the Greek rulers wanted to crush the Jewish faith in favor of having everybody in that empire adhere to the Greek gods and goddesses. And so the people of Israel, of course, included some who had compromised, but the majority of the people valiantly stood against this intrusion into their life and into their faith. So Dead Sea Scroll people hoped for two messiahs, a royal Messiah, son of David, to conquer the enemies in the war against the sons of darkness, and then a priestly Messiah would rise after peace was brought about in the victory of the Davidic ruler. Then he would step aside, as it were, as a layman and give the role of leadership to the priests. And they would restore worship in the temple and, of course, bring the people into the that would lead to the final days. And so they thought that the end of the world was very close. And they were certainly confident that it was their way of interpreting the scriptures that would bring about the victory of God's people. Now, in that context, then we have the hope of the prophets, such as Ezekiel in chapter 34, that God would raise up a shepherd. And this shepherd would be interpreting the commandments and bringing the people into the orderly way of life that would bring them personal happiness, but then happiness for the entire community in a situation of peace, which is, of course, a constant hope for people throughout the world that we will have a situation of harmony and understanding so that the tragedies of human life will give way to the better situation, which is ultimately God's plan. So in that context of a tension and a conflict between groups of people within the families of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, so the three tribes that survived the exile from into the Assyrian Empire in 721, and then into the Babylonian Empire in 586. Those two groups had been dispersed, but now the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi would be restored to the land. And that's where the priestly leadership under the Hasmoneans was to say that we are the ones who are going to guide you to peace and happiness. The Pharisees said, yes, you are exercising your role as a priest, and we honor that, but we don't think that you're the only one who can interpret the commandments and apply the commandments to our daily life. We too can do that because we have the oral Torah. We have oral commandments, the interpretation of the commandments in the 5 books of Moses, so that they can be applied to daily life, whatever generation we're in. The oral tradition then guides the community into the proper understanding of how to live and serve God. So it's in that context that the Christian community sees that Jesus of Nazareth is the son of David, who is leading the Christian community into the service of God. And so we have in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, a long section of the Gospel draws attention to the way in which the community of Christians sees itself as followers of the descendant of David, and that the way in which the Good Shepherd is portrayed in John's Gospel is first that the Good Shepherd is the gate or the door to the sheepfold. And so there is a place of protection at night where the sheep are brought together and under protection. And the next morning, then each shepherd comes and leads his own flock, and he calls the sheep by name. And so, so that image of the shepherd identify his own sheep, they recognize his voice, they don't recognize the stranger's voice, and then they follow the master. They follow the Good Shepherd. And there could become danger, and the hireling would flee. The one who is just there for a job is not going to be so attentive, but if wolves came around, then that person would flee. And so John's Gospel in chapter 10 then develops this image, and then comes the statement, I am the Good Shepherd. And so, so this is the one of the 7 I am sayings in John's Gospel. And the surprising thing, I am the Good Shepherd. I lay down my life for my sheep. Now, in a human situation, normally, if a shepherd were killed in defending his flock, then there isn't much hope for the flock afterwards. As the shepherd is gone, then the flock would not likely survive easily. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life and I can take it up again. And so, the idea of one sacrificing himself for the flock is completed with the hope of life eternal, just like the interpretation of the Psalm 23, that we live in the house of the Lord forever, whereas the Hebrew word is for the length of days into old age. But the Jewish and Christian communities, especially the Pharisee community in Judaism and the Christian community, both develop an insight into the continuity of life beyond the grave. And that continuity of life is based on communion, a community in deep union with God. So those are the ways in which the Christian community has developed this image of the shepherd, and then draws attention to the teaching that the Pharisees had developed, that there will be a final judgment of every individual, and then there will be, for the righteous, the people who lived life in a good order, in the service of God and neighbor, those people will enjoy eternal life. And so the Pharisee community had laid the foundations from the book of Daniel in chapter 12, that there would be final judgment and the reward for the righteous, that is taken up, of course, by the Christians following Jesus. And so both the Jewish community, with the Pharisee tradition being emphasized, and the early Christian community have a common sense of the challenges of life in the context of human vicissitudes of what might happen in life beyond our control, but then always, of course, within the sense that there is a commitment to follow the plan of God, and then to respond to whatever circumstances come with a life of faith developing into a hope for a better future. So let's stop here and see if there are any reflections, any points or questions you may have.
Well, I have a comment.
Yes.
It's very comforting to know that this psalm means so much to such diverse people. I recently had a death in my family, and the words to this psalm came to me and helped me calm down and be able to go forward with the practical kinds of things that one needs to do in that situation. So my comment is that these wonderful words have probably provided such comfort to such a diverse group. And that's really a good feeling.
Yes, and we certainly offer our sympathy on the loss in this world of a dear one, and yet as we struggle with grief, we can, of course, call upon the hope that this life in this world, with all its fragilities, with its challenges, is the foundation for a richer and fuller experience of all that is good. And so we are hoping, and as you say, in using this psalm, Psalm 23, we would find in your personal reflection that's very powerful. And this is a psalm that I'm sure is being used in funeral services in the Jewish community, as it is in Christian communities. So we can sense that coming from the deep foundation in the past, with the biblical tradition laying before us the hopes and expectations of people over at least 3 millennia, 3,000 years or more, we're drawing upon a source of inspiration, a source of hope that we indeed can find will be sustaining. And so in times of loss and grief, there are different stages in which we struggle to find answers to the questions we have. And then we hope that as we are helped by others, and it's always a sense of community that's important, especially when someone has lost loved ones, that we don't want to be alone. And that's been one of the great difficulties, I think, in this COVID pandemic problem that we've had over the past year and a half or more, is that for so many people, the very nature of the disease has led people into isolation, necessary isolation in the physical order, but we can transcend that dismal situation of not being able to cultivate friendships and even have families separated because of an illness that keeps someone in the hospital in isolation. Those are very grim situations and tragic ones, but we can hope that in a mystery of prayer that we can even transcend those limitations. And that's where the Psalms certainly can be very helpful. But thank you for drawing attention to the way in which Psalm 23 has been helpful. And I certainly offer my condolences and sympathy and prayers for anyone who has lost a dear one in recent months.
Well, when I heard the topic, I was so glad to know that there was this opportunity. And I would just add one other comment, which is Zoom also has helped us all. If we can't be together, half of my family is on the West Coast. We were together in a wonderful way.
Yes. Well, that's one of the amazing things of human technology, that yes, this and other methods of live streaming and so on can be extremely helpful and bring consolation. So I'm glad you brought that point up, that things are very different now from what they were, let's say, 200 years ago or so, when people came to this country and there was no way of even sending a letter back home for most people. And so people were cut off. But now, as you say, we can find that we can not only hear each other, but also see each other. And this has been very helpful. So thanks for drawing attention to this dimension of modern communication, we can say.
You mentioned live stream, and I've been attending live stream funeral services.
Yes.
Because people don't have the regular services. They don't have that, all kinds of people coming and congregating. So at least you can observe and share in the grief on live stream.
Yes. Yes, that's been very, very helpful as well. And so I was able to sit in front of my computer and observe a funeral in Edmonton, Alberta, where my cousin was burying her husband. And so those are the benefits for which we should be grateful. And the challenge is always with modern inventions of any kind, but with technology, is that we have to be alerted to the fact that all of these instruments of human advancement should be accompanied by a sense of what's right. And it's so easy for certain people to misuse the gifts that have come through creativity of the human spirit. And so we hope that these particular gifts will be used in right order and for the benefit of for all concerned. Yes. So are there any other thoughts that you'd like to share?
Will you be teaching online yourself?
Oh, yes.
I have to ask that.
This is not my, it's not what I thought I'd end up doing in terms of my teaching career, but yes, it's been thrust upon us. So, so I'll be offering my first, I have offered online courses in this format with another, not Zoom, but the approach called Teams. So I've done that in the last year and a half, forced into it, as it were. But now I have another approach where we don't even have to be concerned about time zones, because the people don't meet face to face, but each one does his or her work for each week. And then we have a report of that work. And then the students interact among themselves by sharing their reports. And the professor is having a guided discussion, but not linked to hours of the day or night. The students can have access whenever they want.
That's good. Yeah.
So it has, it's not
no
as
limitations.
I would far rather be in a classroom, but it does overcome the problem of having people in a class where in their time zone it's midnight or so, when I'm having a 6 p.m. class. So that's overcome by taping the lecture and class, and then the other people can share it at their leisure. But this new method is
whatever works.
So we'll see what we can accomplish, hoping that this will have certain benefits.
Well, you were wonderful as usual. You informed us and inspired us and gave us all a lesson on how the two religions blend. And that's so important too. Yeah. So thank you so much, Father Frizzell, for taking your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And I wish all of you good health and happiness. And thank you again. And maybe you'll be coming to the library and speaking like you used to in our meeting room. And when you come, I'll be in the audience.
Oh, yes, it would be nice to return to old
with cookies.
So,
yeah, with coffee and cookies.
Yeah, well, never give up hope.
Right.
So
that all said, the darkest night must end, and the dawn may bring the sunshine. Not necessarily will, but may.
Yeah. we keep hoping for the best.
That's
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, Phyllis, we thank you for all of your work in coordinating these events over the decades.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss Phyllis, boy.
Well, we'll miss you, but
I'll be around. I'm going to come into the library.
you can come in as
I'll be a guest.
come in as a guest anytime you like, right?
Yeah.
Well done. Very good.
And hope to see you in Seton Hall one day.
All right. Yeah, very
Take
good.
care. Thank you again, everyone.
And bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Special.
Thank you, Father Giselle, and thank you, everyone.
Hi,
Have a
Agnes.
nice weekend. Bye.
Yes,
Bye.
have a great weekend. Be safe and be healthy. And thank you again, Father, for that.
Beautiful
God bless.
program.
Bye-bye.
Love it.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.